Thanks everyone who's organised this. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be back in Cambridge, as it were. Yeah, that was a fantastic election that we had, the highest percentage we've ever scored in Cambridge in the general election, and we managed to use that to squeak Oscar Gillespie over the line to get Greens back onto the council, which was just brilliant. So yes, many happy memories of living and campaigning in Cambridge. So I'm going to be talking this evening a little bit about that, but primarily I'm going to be speaking to my title, obviously, and the title that I gave to Mark, who sadly can't be with us tonight, is "Last Chance to Save a World That Can't Be Saved," which might sound rather paradoxical. So I'll explain the title as I go along. By talking about our last chance, what I mean is this: that the coronavirus crisis offers us an unprecedented historic opportunity amidst the carnage and horror of it. There's a bit of an echo. Somebody might want to mute themselves. Amidst that horror and carnage, it offers an unprecedented opportunity, as in fact every crisis does, a well-known political fact. And that opportunity is an opportunity for reset. It's an opportunity for serious change. Now, if we don't take that opportunity, we'll be making a terrible mistake. And the mistake is even more terrible than you might think and than most people in this society and across the world realize. And the reason is this: these opportunities do not come along very often. The last comparable opportunity was probably in 2008 with the financial crisis. Now, that's over a decade ago. If we don't take this opportunity, we shouldn't assume that another one will come along before another decade or so is up. And as we well know, this is the crunch decade for any realistic chance of reining in climate breakdown and ecological breakdown enough to prevent the drift towards societal collapse in other parts of the world, and also entirely possibly here. The possible vector here might be food shortages. We're chronically unable to feed ourselves in this country, which is a very dangerous situation to be in as one goes into the very unstable, deteriorating times that we are going into. So we absolutely need to take advantage of this crisis. There is a more concrete reason why we need to take advantage as well. And it's this: that enormous amounts of money are being spent right now. You remember that for many years the Conservatives said there is no magic money tree. Well, it turned out that there kind of is, if they want it badly enough, if they care enough. And somehow we managed to make them care enough to access it, or the situation got sufficiently desperate thanks to their own incredible stupidity and recklessness, that they were more or less forced to access it. So vast amounts of money are being spent, will be spent, have already been spent on things like the furlough scheme, on the bailouts which are going on right now. And you can have a magic money tree for a while, but you can't have it forever. Sooner or later, some of this money has to be repaid, or at least stop going out in such humongous quantities. And what that means is that money that is being spent now, a lot of that money will not be available to spend in 2022, 2023, 2024. So the way that money is spent now will determine the course of the next several years. So that reinforces the point that I already made. We already knew that this was the crunch decade for the ecological and climate emergency. But the fact of the opportunity of the crisis, combined with the fact that this money that is being spent on the crisis will not be able to be spent on other things, this combines to create a kind of perfect storm. If we don't get this reset right, then, well, to put it bluntly, it'll be game over. Now, by that, I don't mean that it won't be worth doing anything and that there'll be no point in doing anything or trying to have agency in doing one thing rather than another. That's never the case. There's always things that you can do to make things less bad. But if we don't get this right in the next few years, and indeed in the next few months, as I say, the chances of preventing societal collapse will be reduced to fractional levels, in my opinion. And we could argue about that opinion. But even if you think there's a chance that I'm right, and I do know quite a lot about what I'm talking about, even if you think that there's a chance that I'm right, the precautious thing to do is absolutely to seek to do what I'm suggesting, by which I mean that if there's a chance even of societal collapse, we have to absolutely guard against that with all of our will and resources. And we also have to prepare for it on the chance that we may fail to prevent it. Because a societal collapse would quite obviously be an incomparably bad result. And a societal collapse which we'd done no preparation for would be even worse. So what all this adds up to is saying that this really is our last chance to, well, to put it bluntly, save the world. However, things are, I'm afraid, a little bit worse than that, in the sense that to some extent, we are already missing that last chance. I'm referring to the way in which in the United States actions have been taken which turn us in the wrong direction, away from what needs to be done. So, for example, Trump's evisceration of the Environmental Protection Agency at the worst possible moment in history. I'm referring also to this country, to the fact that many of the bailouts that are going on with basically no strings attached. And indeed, the Labour Party, which you might have expected to give some scrutiny to this, is in some cases urging more reckless bailouts still, because they are desperate, as they always are, to preserve jobs, which is a worthwhile thing to be concerned about, but not if it costs our future. So Labour, for example, have said the government is not doing enough to prop up the airline industry. Now just think about that for a second. The very industry which is at the forefront of destroying our climate, and the very industry which more than any other is responsible for the coronavirus pandemic. The real super spreaders, of course, are planes. So the situation is pretty grim. We are already part way towards missing this last chance. And that really is the meaning of my title, Last Chance to Save a World That Won't Be Saved. By saying that the world won't be saved, what I mean is at least twofold. Firstly, it appears that there is a lot of inertia, ignorance, vested interest, etc., which is preventing us from getting into the position of being able to save ourselves at the very moment when the crisis that we're in gives us a slim, more or less final opportunity in which to do so. And the second meaning of saying that the world won't be saved is that insofar as we can perhaps still save the world, there's a very real sense in which it won't and can't possibly be this world. So the world that emerges, if a stable world emerges in several years' time from the coronavirus pandemic and from the ongoing assailing of our ecosystems by ourselves, the world that emerges will necessarily be enormously different. And this is what I mean in my previous book with the title This Civilization is Finished. By saying this civilization is finished, what I mean is that if we manage to stop societal collapse, then nevertheless it's absolutely clear that what emerges on the other side will not be this civilization. It will be so different, it will have transformed itself so much that it won't be in any meaningful sense the same civilization that we're in right now. And that point is, as I say, redoubled by the nature of the coronavirus pandemic and the more global, the more fundamental ecological emergency of which it is a part. Let's be very clear about that. The coronavirus pandemic is not just some kind of random thing which emerged from nowhere. It emerged from ecological destruction, habitat destruction. It emerged from maltreatment of animals. It emerged from the insane level of globalization that we have, of air travel that we have. That's how it was made possible. So the world that we save, if we manage to save the world, will in a very real sense not be this world. Okay, that's my diagnosis of the situation. I've given you that very, very briefly because I'm supposed to be giving you just a fairly short, succinct talk here this evening. If you want more detail, then I've written voluminously about these matters in recent months and years, and you can easily find stuff along those lines on the internet. Maybe I'll put one or two links in the chat as we go through this evening. And I'm obviously very happy to discuss it with you when we come to the Q&A. But what I want to do now in the second half of my little talk here is to seek to draw some implications from what I've said. If I'm right in saying that this is our last chance to save a world that won't be saved, what follows from that? And especially what follows from that from the perspective of the Green Party, because this is a Green Party hosted event. I'm in the Green Party, most of you are in the Green Party. What does this mean to us? And I want you to draw out 4 implications. I want to make 4 recommendations for the Green Party on the basis of the sobering diagnosis I gave in the first 10 minutes. And the recommendations are these. First recommendation, be ready for a new green surge. So for the last few years, I've been arguing that it's likely that at some point the Green Party would experience a huge new surge of members and of electoral success. And my message was met with some skepticism for quite a while. And then suddenly last May, the message was proved correct in the very special circumstances of those local and European elections. And clearly one of the reasons for that remarkable surge that we had of support last May 2019, I mean, yeah, is the unique circumstances of the national debate around Brexit. But that's not a sufficient explanation, because if that were the only thing going on, then the overwhelming majority of people who are wanting to vote accordingly would have voted Liberal Democrat. And while the Lib Dems made an enormous move forward at that election, we also made a very substantial move forward in the Green Party. So what else was going on? Well, what else was going on was that, of course, the climate has been spinning out of control for the last few years, tragically. And with Greta Thunberg and the school climate strikers, and with Extinction Rebellion in particular, that suddenly came into the national conversation, into the national consciousness. And Extinction Rebellion's timing was very fortunate for the Green Party in 2019. The rebellion, as you may recall, happened in April 2019. And it massively changed attitudes towards the importance of climate, especially across the UK. That's very clear from opinion polls. Forced the issue hugely up the agenda. The consequence of that was that people were primed to think about it when they came to vote a month later. And when they voted a month later in the local elections and in the European elections, unprecedented numbers of them voted Green, the only comparable precedent being 1989, which is over a generation ago. So the Green surge happened, and I was in that sense vindicated. And I must tell you that the Green surge would have been much bigger. We'd have had much more success in May 2019 if my warning that there was something wonderful potentially going to happen for the Green Party had been heeded. It's a little known fact that unfortunately, as we went into the 2019 European elections and local elections, the Green Party's strategy nationally, incredibly, was a purely defensive strategy. The Green Party was not intending to gain any seats in those elections. And along with a tiny handful of others, I argued at the time in spring 2019, this is absolutely insane. This is ridiculous. This is absolutely, obviously, a huge opportunity, this election, for us. We should be being extremely bold in our plans at this election. And if we had been bold in our plans, we would have definitely gained more MEPs and more councillors. So that's why my first recommendation is be ready for a new green surge. We ought to think that what happened in May 2019 is going to happen again. We don't know exactly when. It could be 2021. It could be 2024, but it almost certainly will happen in the next few years. And the reason, I'm afraid, is very simple. It depends obviously on what I said in the first half of my talk. The reason is that the world's climatic and ecological situation is going to continue to deteriorate over the next few years. And this, at some point, is going to cause another huge bump in public concern. The Green Party must be ready to take advantage of that bump. So that's my first recommendation. Be prepared in our strategizing, in all the work that we do, in our thinking for a future green surge. Second recommendation, work to try to make that green surge happen in 2021. Insofar as we have power or agency. Now, our power agency is very limited. We're mostly the victims of events. Events, dear boy, events, as Harold Macmillan famously said. They're the first rule of politics. But there are things that we can do. Why 2021? Well, again, the reasons are fairly clear, and they're implicit in what I've already said to a large extent. If the Green Party is going to be relevant to the way things are going to play out over this critical decade for humanity, we have to move fast. The elections that happen in the latter part of this decade are probably going to be of a lot less significance in this regard than the elections that happen in the next few years. It just stands to reason. The sooner we move or fail to move, the more important the consequences of that. So we just have to try to move as fast as we possibly can. Therefore, May 2021. But there is one more specific reason, which I haven't mentioned yet, for the huge importance of the May 2021 elections, and it's this. They will be, on any rational measure, the most important test of opinion in the UK for a very long time before or since, outside of general elections. Why? Because they're a unique election, because this year's elections were postponed because of the coronavirus. Yeah. So basically all the elections that were going to happen in May 2020, and I don't think most people have really understood the significance of this yet, are going to happen in May 2021. There's going to be a load of additional local elections on top of the elections that were already scheduled, which were already very significant in 2021. So it's a bumper year, and that makes the significance of it locally and nationally much more than any other year. So that's my second recommendation. 2021 is a key year for us. Third recommendation. The first two recommendations I hope are making you kind of feel a little bit kind of good and positive and energized. The third recommendation springs from a kind of reality check of going back to the first half of my talk. Things are going to get grim for quite a long time to come. They may get extremely grim. It's going to be very, very difficult to turn it around, and it has to be done very quickly. The kind of timescales that electoral politics usually works upon are only to a limited extent relevant to this situation. In other words, to put it bluntly, and that's what I do, as in case you haven't already worked it out, I'm an honest voice, always speaking to the truth and nothing but the truth as I hear it and as I see it, even when it's uncomfortable. The brutal truth, therefore, is that the Green Party's hope of eventually achieving a government, or at least some kind of significant role in achieving a balance of power and so on and so forth, that's kind of bypassed by history now. There is a limit to the extent that we can hope that the Green Party is going to be electorally relevant on the timescales that are now crucial for humanity. So while I say, first, be ready for a future green surge, and second, let's do what we can to see if we can make it happen in 2021, we need to accept that even if we go along those routes and do as well as we possibly can, it's not going to be enough. It's not going to be anywhere near enough. The conventional representative democratic process has fundamentally failed. And that is the reason, that's not a reason for giving it up, but it is a reason for thinking that it's absolutely not enough anymore. And that, of course, is the basis for the logic of the Extinction Rebellion, which I'm sure many of you are sympathetic with, but we can, of course, discuss. This is discussed in some detail in my new book, Extinction Rebellion, Insights from the Inside, which I put the link to in the chat earlier, where you can get it for free. You can also get The Civilization is Finished for free, by the way, if you look around a bit on the net, or maybe I'll find the link for you on that as well. And in that book, I set out the argument for why it is clear that, as XR says, now is a time not just for conventional routes, including electoral politics, but now is a time for nonviolent direct action, an absolutely crucial time for it. And we need to be clear about that, and we need to follow through on it. Now, you might think, well, yeah, but that's not nothing to do with the Green Party. But I put it to you, that's not true. And the key reason it's not true is that the Green Party has a unique distinction among political parties. We are the only party to explicitly recognize, in the philosophical basis of our constitution, a valid role for nonviolent direct action. And that's one of the reasons I'm most proud of being a Green, and one of the reasons I've remained a Green through many trials and tribulations, and despite, as I say, believing that the the historic task of the Green Party, unfortunately, has been to some extent bypassed. The Green Party recognises the vital role for nonviolent direct action in relation to issues where representative democracy has failed and issues that are of great moment. It's self-evident that we are in such a moment. So, as it were, the Green Party provides an explicit role for the school climate strikers and Extinction Rebellion in a way that no other party does. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And I think it encourages, as it were, Greens to think, yeah, this is the right thing for me to do, not just as a concerned citizen, but as a Green, to get involved with, to support in whatever way you can, these nonviolent direct action movements, which are challenging directly the appalling state of affairs that we are in, and trying desperately to be the emergency response that will move us onto a saner footing. So my third recommendation, let's engage in nonviolent direct action as Greens. I think that would be game-changing. Because, and this brings me to my fourth and final recommendation, and after that I'll stop, there is a really important role for Green leadership on this. You might think, well, surely Greens are just usual suspects here. Surely what people are going to think is, yeah, it's natural that Greens are going to warn about potential environmental cataclysm, and it's natural that Greens are going to resort to desperate measures such as nonviolent direct action when things are desperate. But let's remind ourselves, the Green Party is first and foremost, of course, a political party. What it does first and foremost is contests elections and seeks to do something thereby which nobody else in the Green movement, for example, the wider Green movement, does. Okay, so it's quite a big deal for Greens to say, you know what, nonviolent direct action is necessary, at least as well, yeah? If Greens do that, if Greens stand up and say, our system is failing, representative democracy is failing us, and you know what, we as the Green Party, we can't actually hope to be elected and form a majority government and save the whole thing in time. And if we're not going to do it, then sure as hell none of the other parties are going to do it. They're not going to do enough. You know, you might think that, for example, if Labour had been elected last December, that would have been a better outcome than the Conservatives being elected from a climate point of view. It's absolutely clear that's true. But what is also absolutely clear is that it wouldn't have been enough. So if Greens say, you know what, we're fessing up, we're telling the truth, we're being honest, and we're saying that we as Greens can no longer hope to save the world, to save the future, to make the system changes that are needed through electoral action as well. We're putting our bodies on the line, as, for example, my friend and colleague Jonathan Bartley did during last October's rebellion, getting arrested alongside George Monbiot, which I thought was a splendid moment for the Green Party. That if we are prepared to do that and to say that, that I think is potentially a game-changing moment for British politics. That's the moment when people wake up to the Greens, the ones who really know, yeah, the ones who understand the situation better than any others. When Greens say the electoral route alone cannot work, the situation is so desperate that we have to move outside the law and seek to start to directly create the future that we need, and bring in something like Extinction Rebellion's demands and empower citizens to make the drastic changes that are needed if we're not going to have a societal collapse, then I think that really does change everything. And then just possibly, if we implement something like that fourth recommendation of mine, we get to be in a position where we actually start to take this last chance to save the world that won't be saved. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to discussing this with you very much.